career review of Muhammad Ali. So we'll be taking a look back at Ali's career, his biggest fights, um, and just his overall championship record. So if you go back to the beginning of Ali's career, he turned pro in 1960 just after winning a gold medal in the Rome Olympics. He had a few fights and he actually weighed very light. He was 192 on his pro debut. And then after that, 193, 195, 193 and a quarter. And this is interesting because if you look at today's heavyweight, 192, 193 would be a cruiserweight. But Ali, for his time, was actually seen as one of the bigger heavyweights. And even if you look at like Jimmy Robinson, who only weighed 177 pounds, Ali was big compared to him. And these early fights for Ali were, journeymen, not really, the normal way that a prospect is kind of moved along. He worked his way up, and the first significant fight was against Sonny Banks. And the reason that was a significant fight is what many people don't know. Muhammad Ali was actually dropped in the first round. And if you look at this in today's boxing and compare it, it'd be like someone like Moses Atauma getting dropped very early. Or there's a lot of prospects out there, like Andre Ward got dropped by Darnell Boone. And you see the backlash that a fighter gets, But early on in a fighter's career, especially in the case of Ali, he was only 18. It was the first time he was getting hit in professional boxing gloves. And mind you, back then they fought in horsehair gloves. And this is something that's really important to consider whenever you're comparing errors, is that unlike today where heavyweights wear 10-ounce foam padded gloves, back in those days they were wearing like 6-ounce gloves which were made of horsehair, you know? And a lot of people don't realize that. And Ali was dropped in this fight by Sonny Banks, who himself, if we look at his record, was 18 with 14 knockouts and 7 losses. He wasn't an elite level heavyweight, so this raised a lot of questions about Ali. He then went on, he beat an old Archie Moore coming towards the end of his career. He then also fought Doug Jones, and this was an interesting fight. Ali went the distance, and if you look at some of the judges, they had it 5-4, which is actually pretty close. It was actually a tough fight for Ali, the Doug Jones fight. Some people even think that it could have gone the other way. And these are little things about Ali's career that, when you hear about it, many people might not be aware of. And that's, exactly the purpose of this video, is to, just shine a light on how Ali was kind of perceived early on in his career. I mean, we look back now and we say, Muhammad Ali, the greatest heavyweight, one of the great, and I believe he is with his resume, but it's just something to bear in mind when we're looking at heavyweights of today, especially the younger ones coming through. We can be very quick to judge them. I mean, imagine in today's era, if there was a heavyweight, right, who gets dropped by Sonny Banks, right? So that would be like a very low level heavyweight. Then goes what many would say life and death with Doug Jones. What would we all be saying about him, right? You wouldn't be saying this guy's going to go on to be the greatest heavyweight ever. So context and, looking back in hindsight is always a good thing. Then he fights Henry Cooper. This fight's in Wembley, and Ali gets dropped pretty heavy in this fight in the 4th round. And Cooper was then stopped in the subsequent round on cuts. And there was a little bit of controversy in this fight when Cooper actually dropped Ali. In Ali's corner, they were able to get some more time because Angelo Dundee actually tore Ali's glove and then said to the ref, we need to change the glove, and that actually gave Ali some time. Ali came out the next round and was able to stop Henry Cooper on cuts. He then goes into the Sonny Liston fight. Now, if you factoring in everything we've said, you can see why he was such a massive underdog against Liston. I mean, it wasn't like Ali was a flawless prospect at this stage. Yeah, he had won the gold medal. Yeah, he had shown talent, but he had also shown a ton of vulnerability, and he was going in there with Sonny Liston, who was coming off 2 knockout wins over the lineal heavyweight champion Floyd Patterson. Knocked him out twice in the first round, and Floyd Patterson, many believe, was avoidable. He actually was. Well, he wasn't avoiding him. Cus D'Amato didn't want Floyd Patterson to fight Sonny Liston. As we see here, Liston gets knocked out. If you just, sorry about these advertisements, just keep popping up. But yeah, Liston was on an absolute tear of the heavyweight division. He was feared, and he had just knocked out the lineal #1 heavyweight for the world heavyweight title. Knocks him out in 1 round, then does it again in 1 round. You know, and Liston himself was 213, 215, so he was a big heavyweight for that time. So Ali goes into this fight with Liston and puts on one of the greatest performances you'll see by a title challenger ever. Completely dominates Liston from start to finish, stops him in the 6th round. Liston doesn't answer the bell of the start of the 7th round, and this performance really was a fight where Ali was a 7-1 underdog. You know, and Ali goes in there and absolutely wrecks Liston. I mean, if you go watch it back, I mean, the movement, the combination punching, the reflexes, was just a fighter in his prime. And in this fight, apparently Liston, between one of the rounds, put some substance on his glove, which irritated Ali's eye and made him lose vision. Ali said for 1 whole round he couldn't see anything. And that just adds to what a remarkable performance it was by Muhammad Ali. He overcame the odds against Liston when pretty much no one gave him a chance. And it goes to show you that, you know, you don't want to be too quick to judge a fighter. And then in the rematch, he blows out for Liston again. In the first round, the infamous punch, did it land? Did it not land? I mean, I think the punch landed, but I don't know if Liston was looking for a way out, basically. I mean, people say there's a lot of conspiracies about it. Then he goes on, he fights Floyd Patterson, stops him in 12 rounds. So as you see, Ali didn't just beat Liston, he beat the guy who beat the guy. You know, he went on and he beat the former champion before Liston, which was Floyd Patterson. So he didn't want to leave no stones unturned. Fights George Chuvalo, very tough, in 66. Then he goes on, fights Henry Cooper again in a rematch, stops him. I believe that was in Highbury, in the Arsenal football stadium. Fights Brian London. I mean, these are just, you know, title defenses that Ali had. Carl Mildenberger, who was in Germany, actually fought him in Germany. This was the first southpaw that Ali fought, and Ali completely controlled the fight. But there were moments in there where you could see Ali having issues fighting someone from a southpaw stance. And I've made a video on my channel about Ali and Usyk and my thoughts on that, so you can check that out too. But this was a pretty an interesting fight, because it was the first time that a southpaw actually challenged for the heavyweight championship of the world. It took place in Germany, and Ali was a heavyweight who fought all over the world, and it just shows you how global the sport was when Muhammad Ali was the heavyweight champion. Cleveland Williams stops him in 3 rounds. Amazing performance. I mean, the footwork from Ali in this fight. I mean, that was Ali at his absolute peak. 1966. Fights Ernie Terrell. Ali got a bit, heated in this fight. Terrell wouldn't call him by his new name, was referring to him as Cassius Clay. And then famously, Ali's like, "What's my name? What's my name?" in the fight. And yeah, just a dominant 15-round performance by Ali. As you see from the scorecards, they're pretty wide. Didn't really have much trouble. And I mean, all of these defenses for Ali were all smooth. There was no hiccups, And he fought a lot of big punches. You would have thought, I mean, even when you go back to the listing fight, well, this guy got dropped by Henry Cooper. This guy got dropped by Sonny Banks. Went life and death with Doug Jones. Surely Sonny Liston, is going to do him in. But it goes to show you that styles makes fights. And a fighter develops as they gain experience within their careers. He didn't get dropped by Cooper in the rematch. Knocks out Zara Foley. Zara Foley was a devastating puncher, but had seen better days. And this was a pretty good knockout. Foley was pretty out cold. Jerry Quarry. Now, I mean, obviously, after the Zara Foley fight, Ali, as you can see, 1967, that was the last fight Ali had in his first reign as champion. He never lost the belt during his first reign as champion. Well, he never lost it in the ring. He was obviously stripped of the belt for refusing to go to the Vietnam War, and a lot of people commend Ali for that because it was really a symbolic thing, because Ali wasn't being sent to Vietnam to actually, be on the front line. He was there. They were using him as a symbolic movement from the US government to get more people to, support the war and sign up to the war. And, with everything that went on there, it just added to Ali's folk legend outside of the ring. And, he's out of the ring for 3 years, and he's not training. And there's another thing I want to talk about when it comes to Muhammad Ali was he was extremely talented and he was extremely hardworking. But I don't feel like he had the same dedication to the sport as a Floyd Mayweather or Usyk, who, just literally lived the sport. Ali was more than just boxing. You had the stuff going on in Vietnam and stuff like that. But it's not even like during those 3 years Ali was still working on his craft like many other fighters would have. And that's a common misconception about Ali. And, it's probably why he's maybe not as versatile as a fighter as maybe someone like a Floyd Mayweather. But that's a whole nother debate. He fights Oscar Benavidez. He fights Jerry Quarry in his comeback fight, stops him in 3 rounds. Fights Benavidez, stops him in, the 15th round. And that fight was actually pretty heated as well. Benavidez said some things about Ali not wanting to fight, calling him a chicken, and it actually got under Ali's skin. One of the only times you'll ever see Ali actually get angry at someone. Ali always was kind of playful and joking. He never really let anyone get to him. He never really reacted to anyone emotionally. He was always the one making other people react emotionally to him, And that's why he was so good at the mind games. He was able to throw other people off their game, make them get emotional, and he just fought his fight. He fights Joe Frazier in the fight of the century after that. Goes 15 rounds, a great fight. Gets dropped in the 15th round by Frazier. I don't know how he got up because it really put him down hard. And it was a bit of a competitive fight, but Frazier was the clear winner there. Both undefeated. One was the champion, who was Frazier, but Ali had never lost the belt in the ring. And it was seen by everyone as the fight of the century. And still today, when you mention the fight of the century, that's the fight that comes up, the fight with Ali and Joe Frazier. And what an iconic fight that was. And what a performance by Joe Frazier. But it is important to note that Ali, coming out of retirement in 67, took out 3 years, had 2 tune-up fights in the space of literally October of 1970 to March of 1971, that's like 5 or 6 months. He's going back in and fighting for the heavyweight championship of the world. You've got to factor that in. He wasn't ready. Normally a guy like that wouldn't go in with an all-time great like Joe Frazier after being out of the ring for over 3 years and then having 2 fights and then jumping in. And here's another thing I want to mention. Look how frequently he's fighting here. In the space of 5 months, he's fought 3 times. And against good competition. These weren't bums, Jerry Quarry, Oscar Benavidez, and obviously Joe Frazier. And the reason I bring that up is when you look at undefeated records today and you're fighting once every 1 year or 6 months at best, you can't compare that to the fighters back in the day because they were fighting constantly. They weren't able to choose the ring, the glove size. They weren't able to, fight in 10-ounce gloves that were padding. These were fought in conditions that the fighters weren't able to control. So it was a lot harder to go undefeated back then. Then Ali rebounds. He fights Jimmy Ellis, Buster Mathis. I mean, this is Ali on the comeback show. And this is kind of like the wilderness years where people thought that, Ali post-exile, he isn't the same fighter. He's never going to reclaim the heavyweight championship of the world. He racks up some good wins. He gets to Mac Foster, who he fights in Tokyo. And that's just another interesting fight because when was the last time the heavyweight world champion fought in Tokyo? Well, I mean, obviously there was Buster Douglas and Mike Tyson, but other than that, it just goes to show you how global the heavyweight champion was back then. And you kind of had a shift towards the heavyweight championship just being contested in America. And obviously now more recently you have Riyadh and the European heavyweight scene, but back then the heavyweight championship really meant you traveled all over the world and you fought everyone. He then fights Ken Norton, gets his jaw broken, loses. And Norton always had a style that gave Ali a lot of problems. He had this sort of crouch defense. He was very consistent. He was always in your face. And he also didn't let Ali's mind games get to him. And that's one thing you notice about the guys that had success against Muhammad Ali. None of them really let Ali get inside their head. Joe Frazier and Ken Norton, they both were also pressure fighters as well. They were low, crouched down. They were able to consistently put pressure on Ali throughout the 12 or 15 rounds, not leave him alone, not let him, not let him breathe almost. And that consistency kind of gave Ali issues. And, he lost to Ken Norton. He comes back. He beats Ken Norton in a close fight. But this is Ali now. People starting to see the decline. He's no longer in his physical prime here when he's fighting Ken Norton, when he's fighting Joe Frazier. And that just adds to what makes reclaiming the championship for the second and third time in Ali's career all that better. He comes back, he avenged the Joe Frazier loss, and this was a good, clear win for Ali. He learned how to deal with the aggression of Frazier, how to fight when he wanted to fight, and when Joe Frazier wanted to get off his work, he knew how to nullify that. And he was able to beat Joe Frazier pretty comfortably in that second fight. He stuck to a game plan, and he then went on to fight George Foreman, which is obviously a massive fight in Ali's career. And obviously, going into this fight, George Foreman was 40-0 with 37 knockouts. And he had just knocked out Ken Norton and an undefeated Joe Frazier. Both Ken Norton and Joe Frazier were undefeated. And George Foreman knocked them out in 2 rounds. Those are 2 of the most devastating knockouts, two of the most devastating heavyweight knockouts in the history of the sport, because when have you seen two all-time great heavyweights? Well, definitely Joe Frazier's an all-time great heavyweight, and Norton would be a Hall of Famer in their primes, get absolutely dominated. It's just so rare to see. And going in to this fight, Ali again was a 7-1 underdog in Zaire. And people just thought he had absolutely no chance against Foreman. Like, how can Ali beat Foreman? Because Ali just struggled with Ken Norton and lost to Joe Frazier, actually lost to both of them. He came back to avenge both losses, but he took him the distance. He still had trouble in the second Ken Norton fight. So how did that guy go on to now beat George Foreman? Well, it comes back to Styles making fights. You know, there's not one monolithic guy who beat everyone. It was more of a Styles makes fights perspective. And when Ali fought Foreman in this fight in Zaire, Ali didn't dance, he didn't box, he didn't move. And that's what he said he would do. He said that I'm going to dance, I'm going to move, I'm going to be too pretty. And I don't think this was reverse psychology for Ali. I think Ali got into the ring with that intention and realized pretty quickly, I don't have the legs I had. I'm 32 years of age. I'm not this young 22-year-old kid who beat Sonny Liston anymore and could move around that way. So what he said was, what he thought to himself, I believe, was, if I move around, he's just going to cut. I'm just going to be the hunted. I'm going to be the prey and he's going to be the predator. Instead, he said, you know what, I'm going to do it on my own terms. Stay on the ropes. Let this guy punch himself out. Be the more accurate, precise puncher. And eventually, in the mid to late rounds, when he's exhausted most of his energy, I'm going to pick my shots and take him out of there. And that's exactly what he did. And then after this point, you know, Ali begins his second reign. He beats Chuck Wepner in the 15th round. He fights Ron Lyle, and there's another really good win that goes under the radar of Muhammad Ali. And in this fight, Ali had trouble early, and Ali's not the same. You can see it on the footage. His movement isn't the same. He's holding his feet a lot more. He's getting hit a lot more. I mean, he's a wily veteran at this point, so he knows how to ride with the punches and stuff, so he's not getting, you know, caught as cleanly as he would before. You know, if Ali in his younger days wasn't able to move like this, he would have suffered a lot more punishment. Because he's now older and experienced, he doesn't have the athletic ability that he had, but he has the experience, the wherewithal to know how to tie someone up, how to ride with the punches. And it was going tooth and nail really in the Ron Lyle fight until about the 10th round. You could then see Ali was starting to take over. You could see that Lyle was starting to fatigue a little bit, and Ali landed a perfect right hand on Lyle that just had him basically out on his feet. There was a bunch of unanswered punches, but Lyle was in the corner and the referee stopped the fight, rightly so. And that is a very good win, because Ron Lyle had an absolute war with George Foreman. One of the greatest fights you'll ever see. You then go on to the Joe Bugner fight, a 15-round decision. There was nothing really exciting that happened in that fight. And that leads us to another significant fight of Muhammad Ali's career, which is the fight against Joe Frazier. Now, in the fight against Joe Frazier, the Thriller in Manila, a lot of people thought Ali, you know, in his second reign, Joe Frazier's finished, because Joe Frazier at this point hadn't just lost to Ali and George Foreman. You were starting to see a little bit of decline in him. And Ali, on the other hand, was very overconfident. He thought, well, I'm the heavyweight champion. Joe Frazier, I already beat him. He's not as good as he was. I'm going to beat him pretty easily. And he kind of had a bit of an arrogant attitude about him going into this fight against Joe Frazier. There was a lot going on out there in Manila. There were rumours that Ali wasn't training properly. But that fight in Manila was the most battle of attrition fight you'll ever see. The only other fights I can think of that had more of a attritional, draining fight where both guys had to dig deep and it was harsh conditions. Well, not harsh conditions, but the only other fight that I feel like was fought at this intensity where you just watch it and you're like, I feel tired just watching this. Like, how did these two guys even go through that? Is the brawl in Montreal. And that's the only other fight I can think of. I mean, if there's more, let me know in the comments. But that fight was just so physically draining because they were fighting in Manila in an arena that had no air conditioning in the middle of the day. And it was 37 degrees Celsius. I think that's like 100 and something degree Fahrenheit. Absolutely insane. I just couldn't imagine fighters of today, even the great fighters we've got, going through that. And you've also got to factor in that the gloves they were wearing were 6-ounce gloves. You know, an absolutely brutal fight that took out everything that Ali and Frazier had left. I mean, both guys really after this fight should have retired. They left it all in the ring. It was a fight where both fighters were actually at their worst, but it ended up being probably the most entertaining fight of the three, right? And you get that a lot in boxing, you know. The best fights sometimes happen when both guys are actually regressed because they get hit a lot more. They make a lot more flaws, which makes it more entertaining. And it ended in a 14th round stoppage with Joe Frazier wanting to come out for the 15th round, but his trainer fearing for his life. And he later said in a documentary that he had seen 7 ring deaths and he didn't want to see another one. And that's why he pulled Frazier out. I mean, Frazier's eye was literally closed. He was getting hit with right hands at will. I mean, in today's day, I mean, there would be no question about whether the fight should have been stopped. But back then, the sport was a little bit more different. Ali moved on. He really should have retired after that Frazier fight. And another thing to bear in mind is if you look here, Ali fought Foreman in 74 of October, right? Stops him. 75 of March fights Chuck Wepner. 75 of May fights Ron Lyle. 75 of June fights Joe Bugner. And 75 of October fights Joe Frazier. So in the space of the year, he's won the title, defended it 4 times, had 5 fights, won all of them within the space of 12 months. And they're all against fighters who were ranked in the top 10 of the Ring magazine in the heavyweight division at that time. Pretty remarkable. Pretty remarkable. And that's why when people compare greatness between a guy like Ali and another guy who's maybe undefeated, you've got to factor that in. Because who past their prime would fight 5 times in a year against guys who are all ranked in the top 10 of the division? Right? And then Ali goes on. He fights Jimmy Young. And that was a very tricky fight for Ali. I mean, Jimmy Young fought very negatively, but he was very effective, to be fair. And he did land some clean shots on Ali. And Ali was about, was he 230 for this fight? Or 225? Yeah, he was 230. This wasn't the same Muhammad Ali. He was slow, he was sluggish. A lot had been taken out of him, you know, in the Frazier fight. And Young turned his back a few times. He probably should have had a few points deducted. But Ali wins the 15-round unanimous decision. Can't really argue with it. A lot of people say this fight was a robbery. I disagree. I think when you fight for the championship of the world and you fight as negatively as Young did, you can't just hope that the judges are going to give you the benefit of the doubt. Going on, he fights Richard Dunn, who was another southpaw. I believe that fight was in Ireland. Oh, no, it was in Munich, sorry. He ends up stopping him in 5 rounds. I mean, Dunn wasn't a particularly great fighter. He got dropped several times. He had his 3rd fight with Norton, and this was a very controversial fight. A lot of people, and I myself believe, Norton did enough to win. I think Ali won one of the 3 Norton fights. And listen, you can debate whether Norton could have beaten a prime Ali, but Ali in his second career was more about will. In the first career, Ali showed his skill. In his second career, he showed his will, and he showed his toughness, and he showed he could win the championship of the world and beat these top guys whilst he was not in his prime. And that's why he's ranked so highly. But that third Norton fight, I thought Norton did enough to win it. Yeah, I did. I thought he did enough to win that fight, personally. You guys might disagree, that's fine. You know, the subjectivity, but I thought Norton did enough to win that. Then he fought Shavers, and really, I mean, at this point, Ali really shouldn't be fighting. And not fighting with probably the hardest puncher in the heavyweight division ever. And Ali gets rocked badly in this fight, man. But he definitely did enough to win this fight, and it's a good win. And if Ali stopped at this point, he would have only had 2 losses on his record, both of which he had avenged. And he would have been, what would his record have been? Because he had -4, so he would have been 52-2. I mean, what a record that is, with both losses avenged. Fights Leon Spinks, loses to Leon Spinks. And really, this is Ali. I mean, you know, you can really put a cut-off point after the Ernie Shavers fight and say all the losses after that was just against a version of Ali that was so regressed that doesn't even count. You know, but he comes back, he avenges the Spinks defeat, fights Holmes, and he's already showing signs of Parkinson's, man. I mean, it's really sad to see that Ali fought Larry Holmes, that the state that he was in. I mean, he was literally just cowered up, and not cowered up, that's the wrong word to use. He had nothing left, but he still wouldn't give in. And I think that fight against Larry Holmes just showed the defiant attitude of Ali. I mean, even in a stage where he literally, his coordination and mobility was so gone, he was still not willing to give in, and Dundee had to actually call the fight off rather than Ali quit. And I think that's what made Ali so great, that defiant attitude that he had. Fights Berbick and loses. I think this fight was in Barbados, was it? And yeah, I mean, you look back at the whole career, and you can break it down as the first career where I would break it down into a few stages. I would say there was the come up, which happened until Liston, when a lot of people doubted Ali. He got dropped by Sonny Banks, went life and death with Doug Jones, was dropped by Henry Cooper. No one gave him a chance. Puts in an amazing performance against Liston, one of the best performances by any world title challenger. Beats Sonny Liston. Goes on to have his first reign, looks absolutely flawless, no one can touch him. Just shows a brilliant blend of speed and footwork and grace in the ring, and people are already saying, is this one of the greatest heavyweights ever? For reasons outside of the ring, gets stripped of the belt, makes his comeback, isn't successful in his first attempt. Although that was 5 months into his comeback against the all-time great heavyweight like Joe Frazier, goes away, has a rebuilding process, loses again, avenges that loss to another all-time great Hall of Famer in Ken Norton, avenges his loss against Frazier, goes in against Foreman, 7-1 underdog again, no one gives him a chance, beats one of the most feared and ferocious heavyweights ever in George Foreman in his prime, the only man to stop him. Continues, has his second reign, has some good wins in against Ron Lau, Jimmy Young, Ken Norton, Ernie Shavers. Not to mention that he had 4 defenses, 5 fights, 1 year of winning the championship. You just won't see any heavyweight do that today against 5 top 10 ranked heavyweights. Has his third defense, loses to Leon Spinks, regains the title, and he's really a shell of himself at this point. Gets beat by Larry Holmes and Trevor Berbick. So if we go into Ali's we see that he beat 11 International Boxing Hall of Fame opponents, and he beat 10 world champions, or is it 11 world champions? Well, let's see. Sorry, where is this? There it is. Yeah, he beat 14 world champions, has a record of 14-5 against world champions. In my opinion, the greatest heavyweight of all time. Let me know what you think. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hope to see you again. Like, comment, subscribe.